Welcome to the Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. In this episode, I sit down with friend and fellow top 100 global retail influencer, Carl Boutet, to talk about resilience and relevance in retail. Carl calls on his depth of experience and research to flesh out the transformations that retail has undergone in the pandemic and the reality of a 50-50 online digital retail landscape. As a consultant, speaker, and educator in the retail space, Carl is now channeling his expertise into a book. It's called The Great Acceleration, The Race to Retail Relevance.
So I mean, the catchy title is The Great Acceleration, but the subtitle is probably more important. And the book is actually the beginning of something. It's not a static endeavor. What it's really does is it's launching a subscription service that is the race to relevance. And that what that subscription is going to do is we're going to sort of take the concepts from the book. There's a whole section I didn't mention also on the data points where we're tracking 12, and we'll be adding during the subscription, more than 12 markets and their e-commerce adoption rates and how that is even broadening out. And
let's listen in now. Carl, welcome back to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you, my friend?
I am well. Thanks for having me back. Feels like home.
Well, it's great to chat with you. Last time I think you and I saw each other in person, I'm tracking, I think it was the Montreal DTL event in Montreal in late 2019. Before that was Store. You, me, and Steve Dennis were sitting together and chitting and chatting, and a few things have happened since then, since both of those events, and 2 or 3. Lots going on in your life. I'm happy you're still standing. It must have been a heck of a week for you and a heck of a kind of run up. So let's just jump right in. For the benefit of the listeners that may not have heard our interactions in multiple places and may not know as much about you as they need to, tell me about yourself and who you are, what you do for a living, and a bit of your journey.
Yeah, which is also evolving all the time, or accelerating, I guess is probably the better term in this past year. So my time is sort of split 3 ways right now. A third is consulting, doing sort of mostly advisory work related to go-to-market strategy for retailers and the ecosystem that supports them. So you can think technology providers in there and whatnot. Mm-hmm. The other third is speaking, which now includes doing a lot of this, being on different virtual stages, especially over the last year. And the last third, and the one that's grown the most, or really came to since last summer, is teaching. So I'm teaching at the Executive Institute at McGill, where I teach marketing, and I will be. And this is sort of a new thing that I'll be announcing officially in coming days. But I'll be in June teaching the MBA, marketing at the MBA at the Asian Institute of Technology, based in Bangkok.
Wow, that's exciting. I don't know. I wanted to get into some of your travels. You made it over to Asia just prior to the pandemic.
This teaching opportunity is actually directly related to that. So I was actually in Bangkok and then Shanghai in January 2020. So I was getting on a plane January 16th, 2020, with this tsunami behind me without even knowing that it was there. But it sure changed a lot in the way I dealt and basically even came up with the narrative for this book that I'm sure going to talk about in a couple of minutes. But so travels once upon a time that we're hopefully looking like, maybe we can start thinking again about doing those before the year's up.
Yeah, it's looking positive. I was tracking, I do a live stream with Retail Council of Canada every week, and part of it I track for the members, the progression of the vaccines, because back in late last year, I said, listen, this is all going to come down to a race between the vaccines and the variants. And I think we're going to actually get past the U.S., at least in terms of percentage of population with the first shot. So, things are looking up. I mean, I often say we can see the end zone, the goalposts keep moving on a day-to-day basis. Things are lightening up where you are in Montreal. We might open up. We're still in lockdown here, in Toronto, but by the time this goes to air, I think that'll be open. Now, you and I first met, speaking of Retail Council of Canada, connected to them. You were overseeing a buying group for furniture retailers at the time, right?
Yeah. I was played a couple of different roles with them at first. It was not their furniture, home appliance, electronics. They were in a couple of different verticals, but Mega Group, which Canadian group, doing really well right now, and still close to several key people there. And so that was, I guess, how we met. And I brought them on board to the Retail Council of Canada, and that's probably in that context that we first met. But
right on.
It was a good way. It was sort of a nice counterbalance to having worked with Costco for a decade and then get really close to the independents. So it sort of gave me two sides of two extremes, I guess, of the retail business model.
Yeah, no kidding. Now, talk a little bit about, because you've talked about some of this education work that you do. Are you connected with the McGill and their Bensadoun School of Retail Management as well? I think you've introduced me.
So I guess now, now I think you could consider me more as an ambassador, because the story goes, the day May 2017 press release comes out that Mr. B, also known as Mr. Bensadoun, made a substantial gift to McGill to launch a retail management school, and so in there was talk of a lab, which was a project that I'd been promoting for a while to do a retail innovation lab in Montreal. So the day after that press release, I was in the academic director's office, who I'd never met before, but just reached out and said, listen, I think I could probably help you with that. At least I've been tracking the space for quite some time and can share some best practices and connect you to industry. Actually, I think the first person I connected Sebal with was Diane. So Diane Brisebois. So that was one of the first things. Because typical with the academic world is sort of they have their industry contacts, but they might not be as far-reaching. So I started off actually as an ambassador, and then worked closely with the school as we prepared to put the lab in place, and so I was on contract with them for a couple of years, mostly on that side. And now the lab is open. It's a really exciting space that's in partnership with Couche-Tard, which Circle K, which was the first fully automated checkout experience in Canada. And just on the heels of their Arizona store, but it was actually supposed to be the first, but because of the pandemic and some technical glitches provoked by the pandemic, it ended up being the second one. And
it's a fully shoppable store, right? I mean, you call it a lab, we call it a lab, but it's a really live, living lab on Main Street in Montreal, right?
So 50% of it would be indistinguishable from any other Circle K, just like a nice new one with all the latest in terms of merchandising and product mix and all that. But there's a significant part of it that's a really fully automated space, which you similar to what we've seen with Amazon Go, I guess. It would be the first comparison, although I consider this one, I think, more evolved, but it's the idea where you need an app basically to access the space, and you pick through, you pick whatever you want, and you walk in, and you have that sort of walkout experience as well.
Right.
So you don't have to use that portion, you can just go through the traditional space. But the reason why we insist on calling it a lab is because it is on university ground, and its primary purpose is research. So it's made very clear that the people that are entering the space are, although their privacy is protected and there's no personally identifiable information being tracked, it's still for research purposes, but it is a fully functioning operational Circle K, or Couche-Tard.
Such a great idea. I ran one of those for Hudson's Bay, a store of the future, where we picked a store and we just put all the newest technology in, and wanted to kind of, once it got past the duct tape stage.
To be honest, Michael, this is actually a lot bigger. I think we're more ambitious than what I thought of, because the lab idea, and I ended up doing it shortly, this past year during the pandemic with shop local initiatives, where we opened these spaces. We're not quite as ambitious, because the McGill one has the resources and the the time frame to really do something long and really substantial with the depth that academics bring.
Right.
But my idea was to do something more like that, story the future, bring in all sorts of cool new technologies, very iterative, a lot of fast moving, changing concepts. Something like story that you're familiar with, and that's sort of a blend of those dynamics. Which with the Quebec Center for Commercial Innovation, we did last summer. Now that we just opened a third one in Montreal, and that's another project that I'm now an ambassador for. But those are really to promote sort of the startups that are developing the new technologies at the same time as bringing in the buy local brands and allowing those two to merge, which is not something that would have been possible at McGill. So McGill is much longer. They're not going to be turning over the concepts in months like we've been doing. This is a long-term, substantial investment that's really going to be fascinating to see how it plays out. While I think it's a nice counterbalance to what we're doing with the Innovation Center, which is called Achetons Plus ici, or means buy more here, which is a true buy local initiative that promotes both the local technologies and the local products. So.
And Quebec is a real leader in that space. I read in the news last week some funding from the city of Montreal to I don't know if I'd call it a competitor to Uber, but somehow to pull together something that enables the restaurants to do their business but not pay exactly the same fees. And then Pain Bleu, which is really kind of amazing initiative. Sylvain Prudhomme, I think, is chairing that.
Well, Sylvain Alain, who was a big part of the retail council as well. Yeah. Benzema, who's the GM of that, and I'm involved in their technology councils and very really that's been, and that actually was part of our innovation center. The buy local products, the platform for that came from Pain Bleu. A lot of good moving things. We work also with the ICTC, which is federal, and the third sort of piece of that project is training tomorrow's leaders. So we have up to 50 interns right now that are being trained in intelligent commerce. So promoting the use of these new technologies to local businesses to make sure that they remain relevant and resilient. Another big theme of mine.
Leveling the playing field, right? I mean, that's the wonderful thing about these technologies is it doesn't solve all the problems by any means, but you and I have got a long history in this space. When I launched Hudson's Bay, it was $1 million to take a credit card online. Those days are gone. Other issues happen.
Yeah, right. Crazy, right?
Right. It's like it's almost like the tyranny of choice, right? You've got so many choices. I think it's kind of like our kids who, when you and I were growing up, finding information was the hard part. Now it seems to be sorting through the right information. Absolutely. It feels that way from a technology perspective too, right?
Well, not at all. For any sort of consumption level perspective, that's where the challenge has become. And this project was meant to sort of de-risk that. So the idea is we created a toolbox. We have right now, close to 30 solutions in there. They've all been pre-filtered to be relevant for small business, i.e. affordable, not just in price, but in time investment and resources, so that they don't need an IT team to integrate an appointment booking tool or a quick ship solution or an SMS marketing, or whatever.
Curbside or whatever, some appointments, curbside, all these tools
things. And that was really and live shopping being a big one too. I think we've talked about that in other episodes, but the idea was, what I told us, we have Montreal, Laval, and west of Montreal area, Vaudreuil, Dorion, and Soulanges that are part of it. And what we tell the teams there is, retailers come and go, right? And obviously during the pandemic, it's been that much more stressful. But what this project is trying to do is we don't want them to go or closed because they weren't aware that these solutions existed. I wouldn't want them. I wouldn't want them a couple of months later go, if only we had.
If only we had known.
Exactly. Because you said the information is there, but it's overwhelming, and they see it and they think it's only for the Apple Store and for Best Buy and for Canadian Tire. But no, to your point earlier about credit card integrating, the same way that now you can get Stripe to take credit card payments very easily. You can take Booksy or to book appointments, or you can use Heyday to automate your chatbots. All these fun things that are happening, and we've got 30 of those in the toolbox that we're destined for these small businesses. The challenge for us is making sure they at least are aware that we're there. And then we have the cities that are promoting their projects, their programs along the way to help finance some of this and support their local, which has been the big one of the big shifts of the last year is the intensity of interest by the municipal partners, something we've never seen before, because they realize the impact the pandemic's having on their high streets or their main streets, and they know that contributes to the quality of living in their respective communities, and they need to support it. And this was sort of one way of doing that.
If we come out of this pandemic with anything positive, it's I think you're right. There's a couple of things I can think of. One of which is, if you weren't connecting as a municipal leader the Main Street retail to the viability of your cities, you certainly are now. Yeah. I mean, you appreciate something sometimes when it's gone. Like if you're thinking of passing more of these ridiculous tax burdens on small business with, I'm going to tax you as if there was a condo on that place. I think maybe there's anyway. So listen, there's lots of
there's lessons. A lot. It's not a week goes by there. We're not pulled into one of those conversations, and they recognize just fiscally the impact this is having, and now they're trying to figure out beyond that, not just the financial side, but the bigger picture quality of life, and so it is one of there are several silver linings, I think, from this pandemic that we're going to come back and appreciate once we sort of get our head out of the water. But we're still in it. So
well, the one thing I appreciate, and let's get on to it. You've been busy writing and chronicling and talking to people. Tell us all about your latest big initiative, your latest venture, the book, and why'd you write it? What's it called? What's it about? How you approached it? A lot of questions. So
and there's a lot to unpack. So I mean, I still even struggle calling it a book, although there is a book that's a part of it. But so the title, it's been a 5-year ongoing project I'm doing, which I'm sure you are, and many others. So anybody who's interested in sort of voicing their position, and books are sort of a static endeavor. So I was always trying to figure out how to do it. But so the book that would released May 19th, so just a couple of days ago, is The Great Acceleration: The Race to Retail Resilience. It's been nice. I call it a 5-year endeavor because around 5 years ago, I was having my MBA reunion dinner, which I think was our 10-year reunion dinner, and I spent the dinner sitting next to my favorite strategy prof, Doug Reed. I was at Queen's. We were actually in Toronto for this dinner. I think too many more people from Queen's live in Toronto than anywhere else. So, and we just spent the whole night talking just about business strategy in general and dynamics. It was a fascinating conversation. Yeah, we touched on retail a bit too, but beyond that, and he just said when it was time to leave, he got up. He goes, "You know what, Carl? You've got a book in you." And I'd never even heard that term before, so I was sort of rattled by it. But it sort of, I guess, it set off a light. It's like, what do I want to talk about? Where do I want to bring this? And I'm pretty good at, I think, sharing paragraph size insights, especially on LinkedIn and these sort of things. But so then how do I start tying that all together? And what I was thinking about writing a couple of years ago was inspired by Barbara Kahn's Shopping Revolution book and the framework she built around
at a Wharton, right? She's a Prophet Wharton, right?
Yeah, she's exactly Prophet Wharton. She was director of the Baker School at that time too, retailing at Wharton. So I really kind of was getting really interested in the whole notion of relevance and what makes a brand or a retailer or any kind of a venture relevant to a consumer. And so I was researching that more and more and paying close attention. I was like, well, maybe, I was starting to think about a book on based on that. And I built out this index, which is in the Great Acceleration as well, to sort of went a step further based on Professor Kahn's work, but sort of changed a bit of the terminology around that that aligned more with the way I saw the dynamic unfolding. And then January 2020, or through 2019, and then January 2020, I wrote a piece for Retail Insider, our friend Greg's publication, going back, saying the last the biggest trend of the previous decade was direct to consumer, and that the biggest trend of the upcoming decade would be sustainability. And that basically anybody, any brand today that was really making a conscious, invested effort in differentiating based on sustainability was going to be able to drive economic value from that, and that 5 years from now it would sort of be table stakes, and 10 years from now, if you weren't doing it, you would be heavily penalized. Your economic margins would be really reduced because you would be seen as quite detrimental in the end. So that was going to be that was where the book was going. And there's a part called the sustainability flywheel in the book that which I was really I won't say surprised, but happy to hear come out very quickly in the interviews I did for the book. So there was about a dozen interviews, of which eight of them I highlighted directly in their own chapters, with illustrations and everything else. So the word sustainability was always coming back without me, without me
prompting
having a question, without me saying, so what do you think about sustainability?
Right.
The conversation quickly would turn to sustainability, which was really encouraging.
Well, and it feels like sustainability took a backseat. I want to get back to that, but okay. So tell me about the format of this book, because you did a lot of interviews around it. Is it you writing your strategic thoughts? Is there a mix of interviews that augment it? How did it come together for you?
Yeah, well, and it's sort of a stream of consciousness, I guess, in different ways. So it is the idea. You could see that it was sort of three books in one. So the relevance piece. So there's the relevance index that I unpacked. There's the sustainability flywheel, that this notion that you need to start with planet, and which is going to allow you to attract better stakeholders, employees, customers, and all that, and suppliers, and then that will lead to profit. So that was the sustainability flywheel, is the 3 Ps, or the B Corp philosophy, or for those that are familiar with that, that piece. So, and then there's these 8 interviews that I conducted with people like, Scott Galloway quite well. Yeah. So Scott, I caught Scott on the day that the GameStop revolution happened. So he was, it was a pretty interesting interview, very focused sort of on the societal impacts of the acceleration. Yeah. And then I go from... And
he worries about, I listen to him on multiple podcasts, and I haven't had the chance to speak to him personally, other than you and I were on the same camera with him, so to speak, at Steve's first launch. But he worries about this bifurcation, so to speak, as Steve would say, that the schism in society, right? The winners and the losers. This kind of binary. He calls it
dispersion, but exactly. So he talks about how the winner, the K-shaped recovery. He has a lot of concerns, and it was actually on camera that I first introduced the Great Acceleration, was at that book launch. That's right. And the first time when he was saying he was using the word acceleration, not just him, everybody was talking about, and that's why the Great Acceleration, the name comes from the idea that we went through the Great Recession a long time before the Great Depression, and so maybe an optimistic way, at least, to look back on what we're going through, we've gone through, will be the Great Acceleration. That's the narrative where that comes from, and now I actually proposed that exact framing to Scott on that book launch, and he agreed, and lo and behold, the first chapter of his book's called The Great Acceleration, which is so. But it's so Scott's there. We have I have amazing, I think the rest are probably less commonly known, but people that I reach out to and done different projects with, that I find really insightful, that are more on the operations side. So Isabelle Blondet, who runs the sort of new store concept for Decathlon around the world, and she's part of their 2030 strategic group, largest sporting goods retailer in the world, which surprises a lot of people in North America. But if you're from Europe, you're already quite familiar, and pretty much anywhere else in the world, quite honestly.
What are they up to? I think their ambitions are to get to 10 stores in Canada, but I think they're at 4 or 5. But they started in Quebec, right? And start where you're close to home, so to speak, right?
Exactly, and so they're growing like crazy right now, and through the U.S. as well. They've been in Latin America, so her vision, and there's a lot of conversation around sustainability with her as well, because their whole core purpose is around healthy living. So they can't, they realize they can't disassociate active lifestyle with healthy lifestyle, with healthy living, which means sustainable living as well. And then so people like that, people like Vibhu Norby, who you probably know from Beta, and how he's pivoting right now is one of the most innovative business models I've seen in retail of the last decade, where he wasn't really selling anything other than sort of the engagement data back to the brands that were in his space. Yeah. Now he's going really hard on the whole live shopping thing, actually. And then I've the head of one of the innovation leads for H&M, who runs the whole sustainability agenda for H&M. Obviously, he contributed a lot to the chapter on the flywheel, which I had my friend Molly Vade from London help me write, because she writes about this full time, more so on the fashion side of sustainability and more on the environmental piece, but as social as well. So so like things like that, people that you probably haven't, apart from Scott, the others, if you've heard of them, maybe because I've shared some other things with them, right, or you're close
just
to
industry thought leaders, deep industry thought leaders.
Well, they're not just thought leaders; they're operators, right?
They're doers, exactly.
They're working day to day in the environments. They know the realities. They're entrepreneurs, they're executives. A lot of fascinating people. A friend of mine in India who was VP of the largest retail group there, who just started his own endeavor too. So I think my next book is going to be around India and in emerging markets, how those are impacted by the acceleration, because they were clearly, I think this is sort of the Alibaba moment for a lot of these markets. After SARS, what SARS did for Alibaba in China, I think we're seeing that around the world too. So we talked about that very briefly in Steve's latest book launch, but that's something I'm particularly interested in, and one of the reasons why I wanted to teach at the Asian Institute of Technology, because it was going to bring me closer to that too.
What couple of things would you like people to take away with them or from your book that you think you want it to stick with? Close the last page. I read the last page. What do you want them to take away?
So I mean, the catchy title is The Great Acceleration, but the subtitle is probably more important. And the book is actually the beginning of something. It's not a static endeavor. What it's really does is it's launching a subscription service that is the race to relevance. And what that subscription is going to do is we're going to sort of take the concepts from the book. There's a whole section I didn't mention also on the data points, where we're tracking 12, and we'll be adding during the subscription, more than 12 markets and their e-commerce adoption rates and how that is even broadening out and what are we defining as e-commerce. But the core tenet, and what the race to resilience is, and what I speak mostly about in the book, and how sustainability and the relevance index and all this come together, is this notion that we're going to a 50-50 world, or at least I want to support and be there for organizations that are preparing for a 50-50 world.
Unpack that for me. What do you mean by 50-50
so 50-50 physical, digital, where basically the difference doesn't really matter as much as it does right now. You and I come from places where we worked in initiatives that, they were very siloed, to use our friend Steve's thing, or the silos would now belong on farms.
Right.
But so how right now we're in an 80-20. We pushed up maybe to an 80-25, 75-25. We went as high as 70-30 during the pandemic, but we're clearly headed to a 50-50 world where things will be as physical as they are digital, and the differences are going to matter less and less. And if anything, they're just going to improve the outcome of the other. So, so the idea is,
do you worry getting back to our first part of the discussion, do you worry about small Main Street entrepreneurs in a 50-50 world?
Not really, because for the exact same reason we said, that they can now integrate e-commerce payment for next to nothing in there. I mean, it takes the wherewithal and the motivation and the mindset to do it, and that I am worried about some of those. I'm
also worried about the big platforms that they need to use to get their message out. I mean, they really become like utilities. I mean, you can't it's very hard to be more clever on Facebook, to be more clever with your AdWords.
100%. Yes, 100%. But I think we're going to see, as we head to this 50-50, and you're right to point that out, because they're the ones that are stepping on the gas. And that's what I think when we're saying we're heading to a 50-50 world. It's not just because the consumer is heading there. It's because the most well capitalized corporations in the world are pushing us towards that. So if you look at the highest value caps in the world, out of 10, you'll see that 8 of them are technology companies that are whose business model is predicated on just getting more and more data, and makes it more and more difficult for the small to compete directly against that. But there are countering measures. look at our I think a perfect example is Shopify. How there's going to be the yin and the yang, and more and more. Or Google is interesting because they're sort of the behemoth, but they seem to be trying to play against the Amazon and making it easier for Shopify.
I worry that I worry these guys act more as enablers than traffic drivers. They play a wonderful role in the ecosystem, but ultimately,
I agree. I'm actually more concerned. I'm less concerned about them, but you're right to point it out, because especially for discovery, we're more and more dependent on those platforms, and it's getting. And it used to be sort of the secret sauce, and how a lot of D2C got started was just knowing how to game the system, and you can't game them anymore. No. I'm more concerned at the other end. So I talk about discovery to delivery, and how each piece of that gets is impacted by this going to this 50-50 world. But the delivery piece is the one, because it's hard, and even the biggest players are sort of outsourcing that. And my little play on the word Instamart with Instacart. I mean, how it's just a switch away. We're just from a C to an M, and next thing you know, you've been feeding who becomes your largest competitor. And I have no idea if they're going to do it or not. If I was their shareholder, I would think they should. But
when, not if, you become our prime minister, please put all the resources you can into Canada Post, because I think if I had a magic wand and I could wave anything to happen for our indie, Main Street, vibrant retailers, it's got to be Canada Post.
Yeah. And I work a lot with Canada Post, especially this past year, and their chief operating officer, who I knew when he was in Singapore, running DHL's eCommerce. They have Charles, they have Brewer, they have an amazing team. They're putting a lot of resources in trying to, it's a complicated situation, but they're doing, small, medium, large size. They're trying to do everything they can. You probably know people like Melanie Belin here in Quebec.
Sure.
They're knocking on all the doors. They're super present. But it's a good point. I think
they've got to have support, though, right?
Mark, we think about Mark Smith, our friend Mark, and they've been very progressive. But they need the support, and it's a tough business. Pivoting from a business model that relied on stamps and envelope to go to this,
it's political will, right? I think they need, and this is why I want you to take this on when you're prime minister, is the political will to get them built 5 warehouses at the speed that Amazon does it.
Yeah. Well, that's
right?
That's what Charles. That's one of my data points, and even bringing up in the book that Charles shared in one of the Canada Post events. They hit 2029 volume in May. That was one of the big, the great acceleration. It was sort of a portal into the future, where you sort of opened up this time machine and you saw 10 years forward. And that was one of the data points that I used to justify why I use that analogy, because Charles would tell you that they saw peak parcel volumes that they were anticipating for 2029.
Cyber Monday every day.
Now they're playing catch up. So.
Yeah. Well, and they're it's like Cyber Monday every day. Well, listen, we're coming up on our time. The book is The Great Acceleration: The Race to Retail Resilience. Now, where can people get their hands on this great tome of wisdom?
It's ever evolving and iterative tome of wisdom that's going to turn into a subscription service. Is available on my website. I decided consciously to sort of forego the other platforms, because I want this to really be a two-way conversation. So they can download the PDF for $12.99 from StudioRx.ca. StudioRx.ca is my website. They can find me on LinkedIn quite easily as well. And I can point them in the right direction. And if they're really into physical copies, and they're really into wanting to understand all this and have probably an expense account to back it up, I have what I'm calling the VIP experience, which gets you a copy of the physical book, gives you 1 hour of my time, gives you the ebook, gives you 3 months of the subscription for $249, which is sort of my way of doing a physical book, is saying there's a catch to it, and there's only 100 of them. So if you're going to be one of the 100 owners of my physical book, and you'll have an hour of my time to thank you in return for that.
Well, thank you for a half hour of your time. I feel like I should stroke you a big check just for thanks for sharing your wisdom.
Well, just support me in my prime ministership, and we'll be okay.
You got my vote, my friend. You got my vote.
Thanks.
Listen, well, thanks, Carl, for joining me, and we'll get back in touch a bit later in the year and see how things evolve as we get back to whatever the new normal looks like. Congratulations on your success. I barely have time to read books, let alone to write them. So,
well, that's why it's going to be a subscription. I figure it'd be easier to keep up.
Easier to
Thank
consume.
you so much, Michael. I always really appreciate your support. You're always there, and it means a lot to me. So I'm very grateful.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of The Voice of Retail. Be sure and follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you enjoy podcasts so you don't miss out on the latest episodes, industry news, and insights. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a rating review, as it really helps us grow so that we continue to get amazing guests onto the show. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, president of LeBlanc Company Inc., and if you're looking for more content or want to chat, follow me on LinkedIn or visit my website at meleblanc.co. Until next time, stay safe, have a great week.